George Silverman's Explanation is a short story by Charles Dickens. This Bildungsroman tale is narrated from the first-person perspective by the titular George Silverman in a bleak, desolate, and somber tone. Before we begin the analysis of George Silverman's Explanation, don't forget to like and subscribe. George recounts his poverty-ridden upbringing and the aftermath of losing his parents. His narrative depicts the psychological toll of oppression and the struggles of navigating life following a grim beginning, combined with unjust accusations against him. He was an insecure individual striving to do right but often misunderstood. George reflects on spending his early years in a dismal cellar with impoverished parents who denied him even basic necessities like food, branding him as a worldly little devil for wanting to be housed and warmed, worldly as to wanting to be fed. Upon their death from fever, he avoided love and rightful financial support, opting for self-sacrifice. George shares encounters with a religious hypocritical educator and a deceitful benefactress, shaping his worldview. Now at 60, he seeks understanding for his life's choices, depicting himself as a misrepresented and misunderstood, introverted victim of circumstance. Despite earning respect as a tutor and having loyal friends, remnants of his neglected childhood linger, perpetually coloring his psyche. He hopes his written account will elucidate his relentless pursuit of goodness and evoke empathy from readers, striving for compassionate judgment. Mr. Silverman faces difficulty initiating his self-reflection, requiring 3 attempts to begin his explanation account. He begins by revisiting his bleak childhood memories, recounting a dreadful upbringing in a clammy cellar in Preston, where parental abuse and poverty were daily companions. The cellar's darkness mirrors the emotional gloom George experienced as a child. Deprived of education and worldly knowledge, he passively accepted his circumstances, seldom venturing beyond his confined space. His mother's harsh rebuke of being a worldly little devil for expressing basic needs instilled a sense of guilt and self-doubt, shaping his perception of self-care as morally wrong. The trauma stemming from his mother's harsh words and the loss of his parents deepen his internal conflict, fostering a belief in his innate depravity. Rescued from poverty by the ostensibly self-righteous brother Hawkyard, George's adolescence is marked by withdrawal and susceptibility to manipulation by the religious hypocrite Hawkyard. Despite fleeting suspicions, he ultimately defends Hawkyard, attributing his doubts to personal flaws. George exhibits a noticeable lack of confidence in social situations, stemming from his isolated childhood in the cellar. Despite his role as a tutor, he struggles to form meaningful connections and harbors deep-seated mistrust towards others, fearing a repetition of his parents' cruelty. I myself am always in the shadow looking on. Not unsympathetically, God forbid, but looking on alone, much as I looked at Sylvia from the shadows of the ruined house. Despite his academic achievements and a scholarship to Cambridge, George remains emotionally distant throughout his schooling and university years. A turning point arises when Lady Fairway offers him a rectorate position with a side of personal secretary work and tutoring her daughter, Adelina, on a modest salary of £200 a year. Despite his burgeoning feelings for Adelina, George selflessly orchestrates her relationship with another student, Mr. Granville, believing himself unworthy of her affection. Mr. Granville was a young gentleman near coming of age, very well connected, but what is called a poor relation. George's self-sacrifice extends to officiating their clandestine marriage, which incurs Lady Fairway's wrath. Accused of ulterior motives of scheming with Mr. Granville to get money out of Adelina's inheritance, George is forced to resign from his position. There was a great stir made, the bishop was appealed to, I received a severe reprimand, and narrowly escaped suspension. For years a cloud hung over me, and my name was tarnished. Eventually, he finds solace in the unwavering support of Adelina and her husband and others. Little by little, the belief widened that I was not capable of what was laid to my charge. Despite facing adversity, George's integrity ultimately prevails, earning him the respect of those around him. George Silverman's Explanation offers a depressive reflection on a man disenchanted with his life and disillusioned by the people surrounding him. His horrific upbringing amidst death, disease, and poverty left him socially withdrawn and burdened by a self-image shaped by others' perceptions of him as selfish and worldly. Despite enduring exploitation by zealous religious charlatans, he perseveres in gaining education, eventually becoming a cleric through the aid of a benefactress whose accusations mirror her own moral corruption. Despite his altruism, his virtuous deeds go unrewarded, hindered by his inability to reciprocate love. The story highlights the struggle against personal inclinations towards selfishness and greed, as the protagonist strives for self-reformation and gains a reputation for kindness and innocence. However, a false accusation tests his relationships, revealing true allies amidst adversity. Grateful to those who aided him, he reluctantly accepts his resignation, acknowledging his place in society as subordinate to Lady Fareway. Approaching the twilight of his life, George seeks acceptance, echoing the longing for validation he felt as a child. His life's tale, encapsulated in his written explanation, invites judgment on his character, portraying him as a kind and honest man who, despite his isolation, retains the trust of a few loyal companions. Yet, his sacrificial actions and profuse gratitude suggest a deep-seated yearning for acceptance that has defined his existence. Despite his inclination to prioritize others' happiness over his own, Silverman displays characteristic flaws stemming from an unbalanced and unhealthy relationship with others. His fervent desire to portray himself as selflessly altruistic and detached leads him to document his explanation, rendering him an unreliable narrator. References to rats and the sorrowful gaze of the sky reveal a profound lack of self-esteem. I have written that the sky stared sorrowfully at me. Therein have I anticipated the answer. I knew that all these things looked sorrowfully at me, that they seemed to sigh or whisper, not without pity for me, alas. Poor worldly little devil! How not to be this worldly little devil? How not to have a repugnance towards myself as I had towards the rats? I hid in a corner of one of the smaller chambers, frightened at myself, and crying, and I tried to think about it. While the narrative maintains a somber tone, Dickens contrasts Silverman with the larger-than-life character of Hawkyard, whose haughty hypocrisy starkly contrasts Silverman's selflessness and self-love. Behave well, and I'll put you to school. Oh, yes. I'll put you to school, though I'm not obligated to do it. I am a servant of the Lord, George, and I have been a good servant to him, I have, these 35 years. The Lord has had a good servant in me, and he knows it. Silverman's self-denial in pursuing Adelina's affection juxtaposes with his active involvement in orchestrating her relationship with Granville, a man molded to mirror his own spirit. Did I labor to raise Mr. Granville with the other? Directing his attention to such subjects as I too well knew interested her, and fashioning him into a greater resemblance to myself in my solitary one strong aspect. This arrangement allows Silverman to derive the mixed feeling of grave pleasure and acute pain from their burgeoning love. Hope you like, share and subscribe for more videos.